The heater in Elena's luxury sedan had died an hour ago, and now the windows were icing over from the inside. She was buried in a snowbank somewhere in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of Wyoming. Dressed in a designer coat that offered no protection against 20 degrees below zero. Her phone displayed no service. As the numbness crept from her fingers to her heart, she closed her eyes, accepting that she would never see the city lights again. Then a heavy thud shook the ground. A shadow blocked the wind. A horse snorted, and a rough, deep voice cut through the howling storm. "Don't you fall asleep on me, darlin'." The silence of the Wyoming wilderness was not peaceful. It was predatory. Elena checked her watch for the 10th time, the expensive gold band feeling cold against her wrist. She was 3 hours late for the meeting in Jackson Hole, and the snow was falling harder. As a senior architect for a major Chicago firm, Elena was used to controlling her environment. She built skyscrapers, she directed crews, and she managed chaos with a calm precision. But out here, amidst the jagged peaks and endless pines, she was utterly powerless. The GPS on her dashboard had been spinning in circles for the last 20 miles. She had taken a shortcut, a narrow service road that wound through the foothills of the Tetons. It was a mistake that a local would never have made, but Elena wasn't a local. She was a woman of steel and glass, trying to navigate a world of rock and ice. The snow began to pile up on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Visibility dropped to zero, the world outside turning into a terrifying sheet of white. Her luxury car, designed for city streets and highway cruising, began to lose its grip. The tires spun helplessly against a patch of black ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. Lena gasped, gripping the leather steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She slammed on the brakes, but it was no use. Gravity had taken over. With a sickening crunch of metal against rock, the car slid off the road and tilted into a ditch. The engine sputtered and died, leaving an immediate deafening silence in its wake. Elena sat frozen for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She tried the ignition, but the engine only gave a pathetic, grinding whine. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the back of her neck. She looked at her phone, praying for just one bar of signal, but the screen remained blank. Outside, the wind began to howl, a mournful sound that signaled the storm was intensifying. Minutes turned into an hour, and the temperature inside the car plummeted rapidly. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself, but the chill seeped into her bones. This wasn't just a delay anymore. This was a life-threatening situation. She thought about her apartment in Chicago, warm and safe, overlooking the lake. She thought about the presentation she was supposed to give, realizing how meaningless it now seemed. The snow was burying the car, turning her vehicle into an icy tomb. Lena's eyelids began to feel heavy, the dangerous lethargy of hypothermia setting in. She knew she shouldn't sleep, knew that sleeping meant dying, but the cold was exhausting. Her breath came in shallow, visible puffs of white mist in the darkening cabin. "Just close your eyes for a second," a voice in her head whispered seductively. She let her head rest against the freezing window, the world fading to black. And then she heard a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the storm. It was the rhythmic crunch of heavy hooves breaking through the deep crust of snow. She forced her eyes open, squinting through the frosted glass into the swirling white. A massive shape emerged from the blizzard, dark and imposing against the snow. It was a horse, a black beast that looked like a creature from a nightmare. And atop the horse sat a man, his hat pulled low, his shoulders broad and coated in ice. He looked like the mountain itself had taken human form and come to claim her. Silas pulled on the reins, bringing his stallion, Midnight, to a halt beside the buried car. He had been out checking the fence line when he saw the glint of metal in the ditch. He cursed under his breath. City folk always underestimated the Wyoming winter. The driver's side window was iced over, but he could see a silhouette inside. He banged his gloved fist against the glass, shouting over the roar of the wind. "Hey, can you hear me?" His voice was rough, accustomed to shouting commands to cattle. There was no movement inside, and a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He pulled a heavy knife from his belt and wedged it into the doorframe, prying it open. The door groaned in protest, frozen shut, but Silas put his shoulder into it. With a crack of ice, the door swung open, revealing the woman slumped inside. She was pale, her lips tinged with blue, looking fragile and terrifyingly still. Silas didn't hesitate. He unbuckled her seatbelt and pulled her into his arms. She was light, lighter than the bales of hay he threw around every morning. "I've got you," he muttered, pulling his heavy canvas duster around her shivering frame. Alina stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open to see a jaw covered in dark stubble. "Am I dead?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Not yet, and not on my watch." Silas grunted, carrying her toward his horse. Getting her onto Midnight was a struggle, her body limp and uncooperative from the cold. Silas mounted behind her, wrapping one arm firmly around her waist to hold her upright. He guided the horse back toward the trail, the wind biting at his exposed face. The ride back to the ranch was a battle against the elements, a slow, grueling trudge. Lena drifted in and out of consciousness, feeling only the heat radiating from the man behind her. She smelled wet wool leather and the distinct earthy scent of pine and tobacco. They arrived at the homestead just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The cabin was a sturdy structure of logs and stone built to withstand exactly this kind of weather. Silas carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the swirling snow. The warmth of the cabin hit them like a physical wall, thick with the smell of wood smoke. He deposited her on the large leather sofa in front of the stone fireplace. "We need to get you warm," he said, his voice practical and devoid of panic. He knelt before her, pulling off her expensive leather boots that were soaked through. He rubbed her feet briskly, trying to get the circulation flowing back into her toes. Elena watched him through hazy eyes, taking in the rough lines of his face. He had eyes the color of slate, hard and unreadable, but his hands were surprisingly gentle. "I'm Silas," he said, tossing another log onto the fire, sending sparks flying up the chimney. "Alina," she managed to chatter out, her teeth clacking together uncontrollably. "Lena, you picked a hell of a day for a scenic drive," he said dryly. He went to the kitchen and returned with a steaming mug of black coffee. "Drink this. It'll taste like mud, but it's hot," he commanded, pressing it into her hands. She took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness, but the heat spread through her chest. She looked around the cabin. It was rustic, filled with books and old tools. There was no TV, no computer, nothing that connected him to the outside world. "Shh, do you have a phone?" she asked, her voice gaining a little strength. "I need to call my office." Silas let out a short, humorless laugh as he stoked the fire. "The leans are down. Probably won't be back up for days. You're stuck here, city girl?" Alina felt a surge of frustration. "I can't be stuck. I have a life. I have deadlines." Silas turned to look at her, his gaze steady and unimpressed by her urgency. "The storm doesn't care about your deadlines out here. You move on nature's time." The storm raged for 3 days, burying the ranch in 4 feet of snow. For Alina, the first day was agonizing. She paced the small cabin like a caged tiger. She checked her phone every 10 minutes, cursed the lack of Wi-Fi, and worried about her schedule. Silas watched her with a mixture of amusement and annoyance, saying very little. He went about his chores, hauling wood, feeding the horses in the barn, fixing tack. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm that drove Alina absolutely crazy. "Don't you ever hurry." She snapped on the second day, watching him slowly whittle a piece of wood. Silas looked up, blowing the shavings off the wood. "Hurry just makes mistakes. Mistakes get you killed." He stood up. "I'm going to check on a calf in the barn. She's struggling." Lena, bored out of her mind, grabbed her dried coat. "I'm coming with you." Silas raised an eyebrow but didn't stop her. "Suit yourself. Put on these boots." He tossed her a pair of old worn work boots that were 3 sizes too big. The barn was dimly lit, smelling of hay and animals, a warm refuge from the cold outside. Silas knelt in a stall where a small calf was lying on its side, breathing shallowly. Lena watched as the rugged man transformed, his voice becoming soft and cooing. He bottle-fed the calf, stroking its head with a tenderness she hadn't expected. "She's a fighter," Silas whispered. "Just needs a little help to get through the night." Alina felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in her armored city exterior. She knelt beside him. "Can I help?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Silas guided her hand to hold the bottle. "Keep it steady. Let her set the pace." For the next hour they sat in the straw, shoulder to shoulder, focused on the life in front of them. Silence stretched between them, but for the first time, it wasn't awkward. It was companionable. Alina realized she hadn't thought about her emails or her blueprints in over an hour. She looked at Silas, seeing the lines of fatigue around his eyes, the strength in his jaw. That night, the dynamic in the cabin changed. The hostility had melted away with the snow. They cooked dinner together, a simple stew made from venison and root vegetables. Alina chopped carrots while Silas seasoned the meat, moving around the small kitchen and sink. They ate by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the log walls. "Why do you live out here alone?" Lena asked, nursing a glass of whiskey he had poured. Silas stared into the fire. "The world out there, ... it's too loud. It forgets what matters." "And what matters?" Alina challenged gently, leaning closer to him. Silas said, gesturing to the fire, the cabin, the dark night outside. "Silence. Hard work, knowing that the land owns you, not the other way around." Alina looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a magnetic pull she couldn't deny. "It's lonely," she whispered. "It was," Silas said, his eyes locking onto hers.
Ice.
"Until about 3 days ago." The air between them grew heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. His rough thumb tracing the line of her jawline. Alina leaned into his touch, her heart racing faster than it had in the car. He leaned in, and she closed her eyes, anticipating the brush of his lips. But he pulled back at the last second, a look of conflict crossing his face. "You're leaving, Alina," he said, his voice gruff. "As soon as the road's clear. You belong to the city." "I'm here now," she argued, grabbing his hand. "Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," Silas admitted, his voice ragged. "That's why it's dangerous." Stood up abruptly and went to the window, staring out at the moonlight on the snow. Alina watched him, frustration and desire warring within her. She realized then that she wasn't just attracted to him. She was falling for the peace he offered. She was falling for the man who saved calves and respected the storm. By the 5th day, the sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the pristine white landscape. The county plows had finally made it through to the main road. Silas came into the cabin, stomping the snow off his boots, roads open. "I can take you to town." The words hung in the air like a sentence, heavy and final. Lena felt a pit in her stomach. She packed her few belongings slowly. She didn't want to go. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She walked out to the truck where Silas was waiting, the engine idling. "Silas," she said, stopping him before he could open the door. "Come with me," she blurted out. The words rushed out of her like a dam breaking. Silas froze, his hand on the door handle. He looked at her, confused. "What?" "Come to Chicago. Maybe you can sell the ranch. You can do anything there." She stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "I can get you a job. We can be together." Silas looked at her, and for a moment she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. But then he looked past her, at the mountains rising majestically in the distance. He looked at the barn where the calf was recovering, at the fences he had built with his father. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound sadness settling over his features. "I can't, Alina. I'm not a city man. I'd wither and die in a place like that." "But you'd have me," she argued, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Isn't that enough?" He reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "It's more than I deserve, but I can't leave this land. Your roots are too deep." "So that's it?" Elena pulled away, hurt flashing across her face. "You choose the dirt over us?" "I'm choosing who I am," Silas said quietly. "I went with you. I wouldn't be the man you love." "You're stubborn," she cried, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You're impossibly stubborn." "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Elena." The drive to the town was silent, a suffocating silence filled with unspoken words. He dropped her off at the rental car agency, where a replacement vehicle was waiting. He carried her bag to the car, lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Take care of yourself, city girl," he said, tipping his hat, shielding his eyes. "Goodbye, cowboy," she choked out, getting into the car before she broke down completely. She watched in the rearview mirror as his truck turned around and headed back toward the mountains. He was driving back to his solitude, and she was driving back to her noise. Chicago was deafening. Lena stood in her office on the 40th floor, looking out at the sprawling grid of gray and steel. It had been 3 months since she left Wyoming, 3 months of normalcy. She had closed the deal. She had gotten a promotion. She had attended the galas, but everything felt hollow. The food tasted like cardboard. The air smelled like exhaust. The conversations at dinner parties felt superficial and pointless. She found herself waking up at 4 a.m., the time Silas would be starting his chores. She would lie in her silk sheets, missing the scratchy wool blankets of the cabin. She missed the smell of wood smoke. She missed the silence. Most of all, she missed him. She missed his slow smile, his steady hands, his integrity. She dated a lawyer for 2 weeks, a man who was perfect on paper. But when he complained about the waiter being slow, she felt a surge of disgust. Silas would have waited. Silas understood that things took time. She realized with a terrifying clarity that Silas was right. He wouldn't have survived here. He would have hated the noise, the rushing, the pretense. But she had changed. The mountains had altered her DNA. She looked at the blueprints on her desk. Another monument to ego. She picked up a pen and drew a line through the entire project. "I can't do this anymore," she said aloud to the empty room. She realized she had been asking him to sacrifice his soul for her comfort. But love wasn't about ownership. It was about belonging, and she didn't belong here anymore. Her heart was 2,000 miles away. She didn't call. She didn't email. She packed jeans, thick sweaters, and sturdy boots. She left the high heels behind. The drive up the long dirt driveway felt different this time. There was no snow, just the vibrant green of early spring breaking through the ground. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the creek was rushing with snowmelt. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of excitement and terror. What if he had moved on? What if he didn't want her back? She parked the car near the barn and stepped out, the fresh air filling her lungs. She heard the sound of a hammer striking wood. She walked around the corner of the barn and saw him. Silas was fixing a fence post, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweating in the afternoon sun. He looked thinner, she thought. There was a heaviness to his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He stopped hammering, sensing a presence, and turned around slowly. When he saw her, the hammer slipped from his hand and fell to the grass with a thud. For a long moment, neither of them moved, just stared, drinking in the sight of each other. "You're back," Silas said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days. "I tried to stay away," Elena said, taking a hesitant step forward. "I really tried. Why did you come back?" he asked, not daring to hope yet. "Because you were right," she said, tears filling her eyes. "You couldn't live in my world." She took another step. "But I realized I can live in yours." Silas crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He didn't say a word. He just pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He held her so tight it almost hurt, shaking slightly. I thought I'd never see you again, he mumbled into her hair. God, I missed you. I'm sorry I asked you to leave, she sobbed, clutching his shirt. I was selfish. You're here now, he said, pulling back to look at her. You really here? I quit my job. I sold the apartment. Elena laughed through her tears. I don't know anything about ranching, Silas. I'll probably be terrible at it. Silas smiled. That rare, genuine smile that lit up his eyes. I'll teach you. We have a lifetime, he promised. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of dust and sunshine and forever. Round them, the mountains stood silent and watching, witnessing the return of the heart to its home.